Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. Hope everyone's doing well. As always, I'm your host, Alex Pedikov. We have a fun show for you tonight, as always, so should be good, and I'll be talking about that in a moment here. Just kind of want to go over a few things here. We had an awesome show last week with Robert Leiterman of the Bluff Creek Project. Really fun to talk to Robert about really his group, the Bluff Creek Project, which, I've talked about on the show before. Obviously, Tate Hieronymus is a member of that, and he's on the show pretty often. So it was fun to talk to him about the Patterson-Gimlin film site and their sort of process to rediscovering that location, which had been lost for a while. So if you're curious about that or other shows, there's a playlist down in the description of this video with links to all the other previous live streams we've done. This is number 91, I want to say. So we're getting close to 100. It's been almost 2 years that I've been doing the live stream now, which has been a lot of fun. Obviously, super thankful for everyone who stops by. A lot of awesome people in the chat. We'll do some shouting out here in a minute. I do just want to say one thing here. Let me just make sure I can track down this info. Let's see. Yeah, so I just want to say, this is something I was going to say a couple weeks ago, but I got some awesome little Bigfoot paintings, from a guy named Barrett. I think he has I'm not sure what his account is, but I know I've seen him in the chat before. So if Barrett, if you're here, I really appreciate the little paintings. They're pretty cool. They go on these little easels, so you can kind of put them wherever. Really, really cool. There's that one, which I really like. And then the other one is sort of a Bigfoot shadowy kind of, that's the Sasquatch out of the shadows, I guess. So pretty cool, really awesome. Really appreciate that, Barrett. Obviously, it was one show we were doing, and he sort of messaged me and was saying, "Oh, I'm actually working on an illustration while I listen to the stream," and it was like a Bigfoot juvenile, which I thought was really cool. And then he sent me those along, so I do appreciate that. Really awesome. We're gonna have a bunch of exciting shows coming up. Next week, we're gonna be talking to Stacy Brown. After that, we're going to be having Tristan Yolton back on, as well as Jay Birch. We're going to talk about some of the weird sounds that he has. So there's a bunch of cool shows in store that I'm really excited for. But for tonight's show, we're going to be talking to Patrick Vaugn. Patrick is somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for a while. He comes from a kind of survivalist perspective. So he's into sort of wilderness survival, and it's pretty cool, the sort of stuff he does. I'm excited to talk to him about that. And then obviously the Bigfoot stuff, because that's, of course, something that he's run into throughout his time in the woods. So without further ado, I'm just going to bring Patrick right in. How's it going, man?
How's it going?
Thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate you taking the time out.
Oh, I do this to put awareness out.
Sure.
So people don't run into these things that they don't believe exist and have a bad day.
Right.
So I appreciate the platform you provide to do so.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that, as you know, other people as well that we know, people that I've talked to that, are not online, they've had run-ins with something that really isn't supposed to exist, or that at least we're told is not supposed to exist, right? Firsthand, I've seen PTSD from these kinds of encounters. So there definitely needs to be we need to do a better job of at least kind of informing people that there's something going on out here, because there is something going on. I think it's undeniable. Otherwise, people are willingly subjugating themselves to some sort of PTSD or something from these encounters. So, which just seems very strange.
Well, I've suffered that myself. It took me 2 years to sleep after my first encounter. And when I did sleep, I had nightmares. And so I understand the aspect of that. And yeah. I've been trying to communicate clearly. But, our life experiences drive perceptions and thought processes. And my life experiences are clearly different than someone else's.
Sure.
I learned to survive in both man's subsidized system on this world and the natural world. And it was fluid for me moving between both. And in my mindset, everybody lived like that. And so still today I'll start talking about something and then someone says, "What are you talking about?" So I have, I fail sometimes in my communications, but my driving point is Um, I never thought they were real.
Right.
I found out differently.
Now, I mean, that's as I mentioned, there's people that go through that sort of process, and I think it's interesting you say you didn't think they were real, and I want to get into kind of digging into that a little bit. And you mentioned obviously, and as I mentioned too, your background, which I find really interesting. I've done some basic sort of naturalism courses back in the day, learning how to do bow drill and debris shelters, make capotes and possibles bags and all that fun stuff. I love that stuff, and that's something I want to get more into. You obviously are very immersed in that, and I'm just curious if before we really get into some of the encounters and whatever else you want to talk about, could you maybe just kind of talk about a little bit of that survivalist, that naturalist background that you have?
Growing up, there was no failure. You had no room for failure. I started, I was in diapers in a flat bottom boat on Sabine River. So my entire life was centered around uh, catching, killing animals to fill a freezer and going to school.
Right.
You know, and there was no room. If you failed a few times, you'd go hungry. So you became very good at discerning out behavior and tendencies of animals so that you could get close enough to them to affect your own survival. And I just grew up doing that, you know. And I didn't feel the pressure as a child, other than if you fail too many times, you go hungry. But
Yeah.
other than that, there wasn't an emotional pressure. It just came natural. And getting out of school and starting a life, and you start missing part of you starts missing what was there in your childhood. And so I joined the Primitive Survival Club. Um, and it was nice to be able to go out and not have to kill.
Right.
I don't have to kill. I can go grocery store and buy food, now. But to be able to go out and do primitive survival, of course, I'm a third generation tracker. My grandfather was a tracker for the sheriff in southeast Oklahoma. My father was a tracker in Great Woodsman, and I didn't have a choice. I started tracking at 5. That was where I started training. And but getting into this, we use modern stuff growing up. Now you're not using modern stuff. It's all buckskin. It's all, hand forged implements. Uh, going out, making your own cordage, setting your own snares if you want to
Right.
catch something. You know, knowing how to make wiki ups using vines and natural materials around you, understanding that there's nothing waterproof out there in the natural world. Waterproofing comes from compression of similar materials,
Right.
okay, like grasses and, straws that you lay with each other and compress deep enough so that when the rain hits, it starts turning before it makes it all the way through. And studying all that. And it was it was a blast. And then there's all kinds of offshoots that you can get into
Yeah, it really is.
in primitive survival. But that doing that caused me to run into something that was not supposed to be there.
Right.
you know and I would laugh someone off of fire. I did that. I was an asinine person to someone because I never, growing up, uh you heard something about a Bigfoot. Didn't mean nothing to me. I later on, in school, I read books that were written showing these big 55-gallon drums tossed around and these footprints everywhere. And I asked my father about it. He said it's just a wives' tale. He said,
Yeah.
I've been in the woods. I've been in the woods my whole life. It doesn't exist, and I believe that. And you have no idea how it turns you inside out to get chased for a mile out of the woods by one. Okay, that will turn you inside out. That will, the first encounter, I thought I hallucinated because there's no way this exists. And I didn't sleep for 2 years and had nightmares, and I started immediately looking into this, researching all the history. And then 6 years, after a few years, I was able to relax. It's never going to happen again. All research said that it only happens one time to a person.
Yeah.
I had my time, I'm done,
One and done, right? Now, let me ask you, when this happened, I'm sure you've had plenty of time. Obviously, you thought about it a lot after it happened initially. You were told that it didn't exist, right? You had kind of had an awareness that there's something like Bigfoot, and you had sort of decided it didn't exist based on what your father had told you and what society in general tells you, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think if you hadn't had any knowledge about the Bigfoot topic, it would have affected you differently, or you would have reacted differently?
Yeah, yes. That is why there's great personal risk and sacrifice to me speaking about this. Okay, I am banned from speaking about this in my communities. Okay, anybody, if this sends a ripple through my community, I could lose 20-year membership to those societies. So yeah, I'm stepping out and saying, be careful, because if someone had told me, I could have rationalized it better. I might would have done something different. I would have stopped and studied what was there rather than not understanding what it was and feel like I'm running for my life. So yeah, awareness would have certainly helped me out, and that's why I'm trying to help other people out.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing, because as we mentioned, there's some encounters. I mean, folks like Jay, I see he's in the chat as well, that they have these kinds of encounters that really, even if he had an awareness beforehand, as he's talked about, nothing really prepares you for something of that magnitude. As much as people say that they think they'd be ready, I mean, I say that all the time. I'd love to, but have something more definitive of an encounter. If any of my sort of encounters have been Sasquatch, which I obviously cannot confirm, but should we talk? You want to talk about that first encounter? Just a kind of a rundown for folks that might not be familiar with that story.
Yeah.
As long as you're cool with it.
Yeah. I was hunting alone, a little over a mile in, and I was in a deer stand, and the woods were dead, and something busted me. It shook the bushes and took off running. I didn't know what it was still. So I sat there a while longer, and it's starting to, the sun's getting down, starting to touch the horizon, and I didn't have my flashlight with me. I didn't want to have to fight my way back out of there, because I'm down in a draw in between two ridges. My stand is up off the ground, and I have a ridge in front, ridge behind me, and the bushes on that ridge. And it took off running, and I could hear whack, 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 as it was running away from me. And I thought it was a deer with its antlers hitting the brush. That's how I thought of it. And I hunted a while, and then I got down because I didn't have my flashlight. I stashed my climbing stand, and I was hiking out, and I got to the point where I have to turn and go uphill to the right, and I felt a stare. I felt a stare on my shoulder. And actually what I felt was like something hit me, and it was hot on the back of my left shoulder blade. And it was coming off the side of a hill that was, over there. Well, I'm a confident, competent, armed woodsman. Sure. I know what I'm doing. I'm not scared. I turn around, I do a 360, and I could feel the heat of the stare change on me as I did a 360. The heat still came from one direction.
Right.
And I said, well, that's weird. Never had that happen. And I make my turn. I start going up the hill, and I hear something come running behind me through the draw. It went out away from me, and then came back up to me and got in the trail behind me, about 10 to 15 yards behind me and 15 yards to my left inside the brush. And it was using the brush, moving, tree to tree, hiding behind the trees. And I tried to catch it a couple times. Finally, I fooled it. I took a half step and I look, and there she is. She's in mid-flight coming from behind one tree. and her right foot is extended out, and the hair on it, you can see the hair in the breeze. She's muscular, flat stomached. She has the obvious female attributes.
Okay.
And she's my size. She's not huge. She's my size. Just a lot more muscular. And she hits and she bounces and she goes behind the next tree. And when she does, the sun was on the horizon and you could see the hair fluff up and the sun was shining through the hair and you could see the colors in the hair. And she was a rusty orange, burnt orange color. And the tips on the hair were almost a light color blonde, like a blonde color. And split, kind of fuzzy on the ends, and you can see it. And then I freaked out. That's when I freaked out for a second. But then you go back into your training. You know, your greatest asset in a survival, a survival situation is a calm, forward-thinking mind. So you have to calm yourself down. And I caught myself into a jog because I was actually, my one foot tried to take off and the other one was frozen and I almost fell. And so I take off running up this hill and I'm jogging and I'm freaked out. I freaked myself out a little bit because now I'm jogging. What does that do to this predator? You know, because I'm really start paying attention. Did she change? The only thing she did is she just started keeping up a little better. But so I jog all the way up this hill to this dim road. And I have to turn left, and I realize the strategy she has is I'm here and she's here, and if I turn left, we intersect. She's using strategy and mathematics. And so, long story short, I waited for her to pause. And when she paused in her gait to understand, to confirm which direction I was going, I leapt out in the road and took off, and she chased me all the way back to my truck. Right there, she was 12 foot from me on my left. Right there, I would look at her and pay attention where I'm running, and look at her and pay attention where I'm running. And she has this spindly green stuff in the brush. She's running through it. She's knocking it out of the way like this as she's running because it's whipping. It's just whipping her. But yeah, she chased me all the way to the truck.
What was the first thing when you got in the truck? How did you feel? I mean, did you get out of there right away, or did you sit there? What was the initial reaction? I mean,
first reaction was get the truck moving. I had an F-250 with a standard. I threw it in second gear and took off. Next thought was I pulled the soft drink out of my pocket that I had in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and I threw it in the floorboard, and I said, someone spiked it. Someone spiked my drink. I hallucinated. Someone at the bottling company must have spiked my drink. There's no way that existed. There's no way that happened. And I believed that for a little while. But then you go back and replay it in your mind, because I can play this like a movie in my mind. I see it. And it's stressful. And you start researching, you start hearing people, they had similar encounters.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, they had one encounter, the rest of their life. There's people out there looking for these things, and they're not even finding them. So I have nothing to worry about seeing one again. So I rationalized it as, I'm never going to have that again. We're done. That was my one time. I'm over with it. And I was good for, it was till 6 years later when I had a second encounter. And that's when I realized that there's a phenomenon in the woods that will make you think there's a Bigfoot. That's how much of a skeptic I am at that time.
Interesting. So you kind of thought that it was a human psychological thing, or that people were just projecting something like this in the woods?
As well as studying the history of Bigfoot and all the sightings, I also studied hysteria, mass hysteria, and hallucinations.
Sure.
Because your subconscious mind can be pushed into a fearful thing. And one psychologist explained Bigfoot as being a manifestation of our primal mind pulling up our fear of being eaten, and we would project on it a certain image.
Right.
And so I researched all that. But that didn't explain why I was while I was running for my life. It didn't explain my second encounter.
Yeah.
And so I tried to debunk these things. That my first mission was to debunk them. I set out to debunk them. If I can take something from the phenomenon of Bigfoot and prove it false, then the phenomenon of Bigfoot does not exist. Okay, that was my hypothesis and theory. And I'm not a scientist, I'm an engineer. But so I took knockout. I said, okay, people say knock. I heard recordings of knocks. So I took knockout to debunk them. If I go out and knock it and I find nothing, they don't exist.
Right.
If I do it enough. And I took knockout, and I mean, it was easy. I'd knock, they'd knock.
Yeah.
I'd go in other areas. I'd knock, get another knock. I'd have them come. I'd have a knock, and I did not assign the knock to Bigfoot. I actually developed a hypothesis theory that it could be a known animal doing an unknown action at night. Okay, I'm not willing to accept there's a Bigfoot. Okay, that's worst case scenario for a primitive survivalist that goes out in the woods and sleeps with limited firepower out in the middle of nowhere. So I take knockout. It's easy. I've had knock start out 200 yards and knock every 50 yards up to the wood line, and then walk the wood line knocking and then go away. It's not like we hung out for half an hour knocking. I mean, you would get maybe 5, 6, 7 knocks maximum, and then they would just fade off.
Right.
But that was still an interesting result.
What animal did you think it might be, or in that sort of hypothesis you had?
I thought it was a bird. I thought there was some kind of bird that would fly from tree to tree and would peck on it coming through the woods. That was my theory, on what was going on. And my little boy loved to go out and do this stuff. He actually wanted to do this, and I was working one day and I get a phone call and I'm getting off at noon, and the girlfriend and he want to go fishing and he wants to go beat on a tree. We developed something what we called single knock theory. So single knock theory, my theory was on single knock, if this was a Bigfoot, and I said it wasn't, then a single knock is representing, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. That's the way I took it, in the very doubtful likelihood that Bigfoot was real at the time. So they wanted to go fishing, and knocking. So we go to this place, and it's only 3 miles from the first encounter site, but we're in an open area. There's no way that anything's going to come up here in this open area tonight. No way. And I'm exhausted, and we go fishing that afternoon, and I build a fire, and it gets dark, and he does a knock, nothing. He does another knock, and he tells me, hey, there's a knock. I said, all right, well, the knock was going away from him. It went all the way around this big open area on the wood line and come up right beside us. And you could hear it coming, knock, knock, knock. And I told the girlfriend, because she was never been involved in that at that point. I said, that's the knock phenomenon we're chasing. That's how I dubbed it, knock phenomenon. And I said, that's a knock phenomenon that we've been experiencing coming out doing this. And she goes, that's weird. And then it got worse. Okay. It came up closer behind her chair, because her back is facing that direction. And you heard it swap. And I've had people get on me about this. Well, you don't know it was a hand. It wasn't an implement. It went from knocking to you heard right. You heard a cupped hand on a tree. You heard the bark fall off the tree and land in the grass 20 yards behind her. Her eyes go this big. That's when I got frightened, because that's not a bill of a bird. That's a hand. And I don't know anything out there that has a hand other than unless this animal is real.
Yeah. And
so I jump up, leave my chair. We have 3 folding chairs, an ice chest, and some makings of s'mores. I go to my truck, retrieve a 45, and she had got up, grabbed all the chairs, the ice chest, and all the groceries and threw them back to the back of the truck and slammed the tailgate shut. And she could not get a word out that was intelligible. She was, I said, shh, you know, and and at the truck door, this being darts out from where it hit his hand, darts out into the firelight. And it's standing there. There's a little bit of brush between us, but you could see it. It's right there. You could see its eyes. You could see the eyes reflecting the firelight. And it was looking back to the fire and to me. Back to the fire and to me. Okay, doing this. And it's standing there.
Was that, did it look like the eye shine, or was it just simply a reflection of the fire?
It was a reflection of the fire in its eyes.
Right.
And you could almost see, I could see the firelight racing in her eyes, almost as if her eyes were pulling that light to them.
Right.
And that's a weird way to say it. I know it probably wasn't, but that's just how the reflection looked in her eyes. Okay. And we all three are looking at it. Little boy's looking at it. She's looking at it. I'm looking at it. I got a 45 Glock and a Glock and 45 caliber in my hand. And I said, okay, these things are fast. I don't guarantee I can get off one shot because she's right there. And she's babbling. I had to hush her. I turned to the boy and I said, boy, how long you want to dance with this thing? You called it up here. He said, let's get in the truck and watch. That's a good idea. Three doors slam. We're in the truck. I got the key just kind of hung in the ignition. And he's turned around in the back seat of the truck looking. I'm in a GMC half ton at this time. And he's looking. And I see him looking. And over my shoulder, I look back. And then he starts screaming, go, Dad, go now. Don't even look back. Just go. And he's extremely intelligent boy. I have a pretty good IQ, and he's right up there with me, maybe a little more. I didn't want to look back, just like everybody in a monster movie, and not make it, because he's in the back seat. I've seen that rerun on scary movies. I just stuck the key in, bust the engine off. I drop in gear, and I'm leaving. And he's screaming, "Go!" I mean, you could hear the stress and the fear in his voice. Go! And we hit the blacktop, and he said, "Oh my God!" She come out of nowhere. He said she was on the other side of the fire, behind the tree, and then she was on this side, behind the tree, on this side of the fire, and then she was walking up to the driver's side tailgate, on the driver's side, walking up the side of the truck. And he said, when I dropped it in gear, she was almost to my door. And that was my third encounter, my first solicited encounter that blew all my hypotheses out of the water. I can no longer debunk them. I can't debunk them. The three of us saw it. It wasn't hallucination. And she's what's knocking out in those woods. And that is a significant, people don't understand how significant that is when I say that. I know what's knocking out in those woods. And
you said she, right?
Yeah, this is she, 3 miles from my first encounter site many years later. It's the same one.
How did you notice any of the same features last time?
She was the same color, but she was taller. She was about 14 inches taller than what she was when I first saw her. She was about 6'2". She's 7'2", 7'4" now, somewhere around there. And same color, same being. I'm looking at it, and it blew my mind that I could not debunk these things. I failed in debunking Bigfoot. Okay. That is significant. And also what is significant is what is knocking out there. I know what's knocking out there. And a lot of channels, you'll say, well, we don't know they knock because I didn't see it knock. Believe me, I've witnessed it. I know, now certainly there are sounds out there that are not knocks.
Of course, right.
But there's a knock that has a specific sound to it.
Absolutely.
And I watched your video, and that was a knock.
Yeah, it was so hard to explain. I mean, in the moment, especially in that environment, and what you're referring to is in our latest sort of Beyond the Trail, we had we just done some knocks. We were out in the Everglades, and there's not a lot of debris, room for debris to fall or break in that manner. It would fall into the water. I mean, it was almost a complete mimic. And the type of tree down there, you have cypress trees and certain types of pine trees, but we were not in an environment where down in that area you have about a 3-foot elevation gain, and that's where the hardwood forests kind of start. But then the rest of it is a lot of cypress trees, so bald cypress trees. So it was a very interesting sound. And I've heard other knocks as well where you're just kind of left out there wondering, it's not a woodpecker. It's either a human being or something that can make some sort of a noise like that. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it in some of these situations.
Yeah. Well, their knock is a sharp crack. It sounds like a home run off a wood bat. And, I've heard things fall all the time in the woods. There's a thud, or there's a crash, or there's a clunk, or you hear the bark break as the limb bends around another tree. That sharp crack out there that you got, that wasn't a woodpecker.
It was so close to what the knock that Tate had just done. And I mean, in that environment, I can with 100% confidence say there was nobody else out there, because they'd have to be in camping essentially in the water. We were on the only dry land in that area, and there was nobody else for miles. And we verified that. So I don't know, but when it comes to knocks, it's one of those things that's sort of tantalizing. That's kind of the extent of what I've experienced is knocks, sounds, things being thrown, that sort of stuff. Nothing really visual or movement in the brush. So obviously, I still can't 100% say what it was, but I strongly lean towards something Sasquatch-like. If the skunk ape is some sort of a just a regional adaptation. I mean, I know you're down south, and I think there was a comment somewhere, and hello to everyone in the chat. There's a lot of cool people in the chat, but there was a comment, I think from Tristan, asking the first creature you had seen, how did it compare to Patty, obviously, of the Patterson-Gimlin film?
I named this one. I actually researched this one and her family for 16 years. Her name's Sasha. And Sasha is thinner. Even to this day, she doesn't have the bulkiness or the size of Patty. She's thinner, muscular. She just doesn't have that girth to her. Patty actually looks very much like a male here. I've seen a couple of males here, and the males have the girth and the bulkiness that Patty has here.
And this sort of is a question I was going to ask, but Kevin Hamilton, one of our Canadian listeners, asked, did Patrick say where these encounters were at?
This was in Northwest Louisiana.
Right on. Yeah, so everyone in the chat, I know there's a bunch of awesome folks. I saw Pat from Squatch Talk, Brian and Chewy Go Hiking. What's going on? New Hampshire Sasquatch as well. Jay, of course, is in the chat as well. We were referring to him. Nikki, lots of cool folks in the chat. So thank you guys as always for tuning in. Now, you say you've researched them for 16 years. Was it after that initial encounter that you wanted to do the research? I mean, I know you said you went into kind of debunking, but at what point did you say, I want to actually kind of study these things more in depth? Or was that sort of part of the process? How did that work?
After that third encounter, after the first solicited encounter and the third encounter, okay, this is where, we get real. Because I grew up discerning animal behavior, their tendencies, tracking them, and affecting my survival. And also being a primitive survivalist and understanding, I went into what do they need? Okay, if I'm out there surviving and I don't want to be seen, and if I have to avoid everybody, I don't just need shelter and I don't just need food. I need information also. Okay, I need awareness.
Right.
I need to know what's going on in my area all the time, managing my resources and staying safe. So the information side of it is what I started making use of against them. Okay. And so I would use something odd and put it something odd in their area. Like I use a radio experiment. Okay. I went in, I scraped the ground back for 10 feet radius, dug a hole, put a little Sony radio, dropped it in the hole, covered it with some green foliage and left. Now, if I'm out there doing primitive survival, I have to find out what that is, because I hear human voices and I can't see them. And I'm much better than a human. I can see humans from a quarter mile away or better, but I'm right here. I'm 50 yards away from these voices and I'm not seeing them. So I have to step in this area cautiously and check out what's here. And when they do, then they beat the dirt down in the tracks and leave their tracks all around the radio. So not only do I have knocks in the area, I got tracks too. Okay. Now you may have just because they're elusive doesn't mean they're not real. If I can track them and I can communicate with them with their wood knocks and get yelled at, whooped at, whistled at.
Right.
Okay. This is a real being out there. I don't have the senses enough, not the sense, but the senses, the eyesight and the smell to detect them at a greater range than me. So I can't get up on it. That's the barrier of observation that is built around them. Okay, they build a barrier around them with their senses, and they keep out away from you. And I can go in tracking and find tracks, but I can find tracks a few minutes old, but they're way ahead of me, and they're like this in the brush looking at you. And I can track them up into the brush and find where they were looking at me like this, but I can't see them and I can't film them. And that's the barrier that I've reached at. And it took a long time to do so. And it seems like I failed to communicate the discipline you need. Anything you go after out there, if you're a deer hunter, you have to know and understand what the deer is and its disciplines, how to hide from it, how good its eyesight is, to be able to get up on it to affect what you want to do, whether it's filming them or shooting them.
Yeah.
Any animal has a discipline to it. This one is not an animal. I mean, it is, but it's a person. It's an extremely intelligent primitive survivalist hunter-gatherer, has way better senses than yours. It's fast enough to run a deer down on foot. Okay.
Now that's something I wanted to ask you about was, coming from your background in primitive survivalism, how would you rate these things as woodsmen?
There's nothing better. There's absolutely nothing better in the woods than them.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I think so many of us get to that sort of frustrating point where you have these sorts of other things happening, right? Whether there's whoops, knocks, things being thrown, but that barrier, as you mentioned, of being able to film them. I mean, I have a few questions for you about sort of the relation to survivalism, in that community. But just before I get to that, in terms of filming, I mean, you've obviously tried a lot of experiments. At what point, I mean, what kind of other techniques did you try out for trying to get footage or any kind of thing? Because everyone goes through that trail camera phase and then stealthy stuff and trying to get to more of a way to sort of trick them, if that's even possible.
I thought I was going to be smart. Now I did have success with a trail cam. I'll get to that. It was limited. For every success you get an equal part of failure as well in this research. Yeah.
If not more.
Yeah, it's this and that. But I would go different areas and using especially radio. Radio is my favorite thing to do because it's human voices. They can't find it, they can't see it, they can't spot it out. They have to come in. And so I played with different sets of lighting. Will they come in on IR? No, absolutely not. Will they come out with a camera strapped to a tree? No. Can you hide a camera and have them not find it? Not in any foliage or brush. What lighting will they come in on? Can I scrape the radio back, leave my camera out of it, and set a light out there, a dim light, and then a little brighter light and a little brighter light? And that took dozens of experiments to find out what they'll come in on, what light level they'll come in on, because I'm trying to figure out how to eliminate my IR on a camera, stash it, and have them come in an ambient light source that is provided, but that's bright enough for me to film in, but yet dim enough for them they'll come into something curious. And I did dozens and dozens of failed experiments with that. Pitch black, that's what they like. They have no problem seeing in pitch black. We need lights, they don't. Okay, on a dark, moonless night, they can pick you out. They can read the lettering on my hat at 400 yards with no light. That's how good their eyes are.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. It's incredible just thinking about that. And a lot of folks get caught up on the sort of tapetum lucidum, right? The eye shine. Oh, that's not really, doesn't exist in higher primates. You do have some of those lower ones, like the bush babies and those kinds of things that do have eye shine, right? They're nocturnal. What do you think that has to do with? I mean, just that ability to see at night, just an adaptation, or what's going on with that? If you have theories on that.
I accidentally tracked up on one at night and shined it in the eyes at 6 feet. I saw what was in its eyes, and I can't find what is in its eyes anywhere in the animal kingdom. Okay, there's a reflector behind the iris, a star-shaped starburst. The OD of the starburst is larger than the OD of the iris. And I believe, it's my conjecture, that is a reflector, that it gathers different light waves and uses it to be able to see it better at night. But the gold starburst behind the iris was there. I don't know of it, and I researched trying to find that, any cats, anything that had that, and nothing has that. So I can only deduce that this thing sees things that other things don't see in the dark. And I've seen them in pitch black at a dead run and not tripping on anything. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, you have claimed to have a lot of encounters, and I do want to get into some of the questions. I know there's a bunch of audience questions. There's some good ones, and we'll get to them, guys, I promise. But, so you're pretty open to talk about this stuff now. I'm curious about when you first sort of either had those encounters or started going into the research. Did you talk to people? As you mentioned earlier, you don't really like to mention it with sort of the survivalist kind of people. Did you initially did you get burnt, or did you try to talk to folks that were like you, that spend a lot of time in the woods?
I felt silly. I felt ridiculous in having these encounters. They don't exist, but yet I'm looking into something that doesn't exist. So I kept my mouth shut for 16 years. From 2003 to 2017, I kept my mouth shut. Me and one other person, at a time, either my youngest son or my tracking partner. 2017, I opened up to my best friend, who is the primitive survival officer. He's a national officer in the group. And it took about 4 hours for me to tell him everything that I'd found and seen and tracked. And the thing about our group is your word is your bond.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to have trust, because you may be 140 miles on horseback out in the middle of the Rockies, and you better know what you're talking about. You better be able to say what you do and do what you say. Okay. So your word's your bond. You are honest all the time. And that leads into your personal life as well. I'll tell someone something that is dead, point blank, honest, and I hope you like it or not. It's up to you. But when I told my best friend this, we set up this. I started telling probably 9 o'clock at night around a fire, and we have 2 lean-tos set up. Everybody else is snoring. Got a fire going. We're in our buckskins, And we're just talking about weird stuff. I said, you know what else is weird? I said, Bigfoot's real. And he sat up. And I sat up, and we sat across the fire, and I looked him dead in the eye and told him everything. It took about 3 or 4 hours to tell him everything. And he said, that is interesting. You're banned from speaking about it. and I couldn't say another word past that point without it costing me my membership.
Wow.
You know, and so, and I couldn't talk about it. You know, I've had people ask me about it in camp. What about this?
Pass.
I can't say a word. I'm ordered. Okay, you don't understand what an order is. I'm ordered to keep my mouth shut in this community. And it sounds like a conspiracy. It really isn't. It's just, it's not conducive to have a growing community of primitive survivalists with this thing out there.
Yeah.
You know,
it's going to turn some people inevitably away from it, or you'll lose credibility, unfortunately, because we're just at that place as a society where this is where, and I was talking about this with a friend just today, that the most unfortunate thing that ever happened to Bigfoot was that it got lumped in with the unicorn and Santa Claus.
Yeah.
You know, it's because so many people just cannot even possibly take it seriously unless they have an encounter that they just reality smacks them in the face hard.
Well, 300 out of 570, I think, members that I know have had encounters with them. Okay, so more than half of the guys that's been in at least 10 years or more has had encounters with these things. I know a guy that rode up on one on his horse in Utah, because we have members in Washington State, Oregon, California. You know, every state in the union has members in it. You know, and we're actually international. We have people overseas that are in it. You know, it's a huge organization.
That's really cool.
Yeah, the guy rode up on a horseback and he says, "Man, it went uphill. I went downhill. We left it alone. That was it."
We're in Utah.
I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know what part of Utah. I know he was in the mountains, wherever that is.
Yeah, there's the northern part. I mean, we've been up to the high Uintas, which to this day is probably one of my favorite places I've ever backpacked into. And we got stopped dead in our tracks by something started knocking on a completely windless night. And we did a couple of days later, we had a back and forth sort of knock thing going on in this remote alpine valley with a alpine lake up there. Very bizarre. So it's that area is, I think, extremely conducive for these things. So
this guy, he rides all over. I mean, he'll get on the historic trail and ride it all the way to the end and spend 3 months on his horseback.
Amazing.
Wow. You know,
that's hardcore. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, some of our guys did a boat trip. Spent a couple of months on a kill boat a few years ago. But and it made the news. But there's a lot of hardcore, very serious, very honest, very skilled people.
Yeah.
You know, and it's completely different than what this community is. This community has, you know, it's just a free for all.
Yeah.
You know, in our community, we pull together. We pull our knowledge together.
You have a community, essentially.
Oh yeah,
we don't. There's no Bigfoot community. You know, there's communities within it, but you've got everything from people who are just the complete armchair researchers to those that, you know, it's glorified camping, to those that really try to get out there. People who bring skills like yourself that have a background in survivalism and naturalism. So, like you said, it's a total crapshoot. So there's really no way to verify and then when we talk about, you know, unifying and all that sort of stuff, that's not going to happen. I mean,
well, after 2017, and I told my best friend about it, and I was banned from speaking of it. 2018 went by. I contacted. I said, okay, I'm gonna have to reach into the Bigfoot community. There'll be an expert there that can tell me something. Well, and I reached into the Bigfoot community, and I found zero to little skill sets or discipline, and everybody infighting, and that's not being derogatory towards anybody.
No, but
It's a reality that I had to deal with, and one of the biggest things I run into is that since they don't have the skill sets to do what I do and discipline, then there's no way I can. That's the most common thing I run into.
Yeah.
And it's a bit disheartening to deal with people that I can show you pictures of tracks and this and that, and I can show you every picture. With this team, we come very close to having a patty film. Okay, we tracked one down, and it got dark, and it steps out into a pasture and walks across the pasture. We're all watching it walk across the pasture, and the camera's shining behind me, and you can see its eyes just past the IR, reflecting the IR back, and we're watching it. It's a patty film, but it's in the dark. Yeah. It's inconclusive. I can't use it as anything conclusive except for the people that were there. But we achieved that. And then the question was, now what? How do we get this in the daytime? Because it controls the quarter mile around it, which quarter mile sounds a long ways. It's only 460 yards. I can shoot that with no problem. I used to shoot that with iron sights.
Yeah.
So Bigfoot has always been an equation in my head. Okay, I have an equation that I've been working, and all this information thrown to it. They fly in UFOs and they use portals and they have this and they do that, and I separate all the information out, put it in bins, and organize the information. And and then I keep the equation in my head, and I'm plotting. Okay, I found they're real. That was my first point. And then down the timeline, they knock. Okay, I know they knock, and I played with the knock long enough to have a rudimentary knowledge of what the knocks mean, and I have had conversations with them. Okay, it's strange to say, strange for someone to say, but that is the reality of it. I spent a lot of time out there with this. Okay. Another part of the equation is their eyes are far better than ours. They can see you coming a long ways away. They can hear you coming a long ways away. Our conveyances are a weakness to us.
Yeah, we're elephants in the woods.
Yeah. Well, you drive down. I watch this show. I watch this on a show. It really happened. And I've seen it happen time and time again. They run up. They come roaring up in a F-350 down a rock road, and they park, slide to halt, and they jump out. Thought you jump out, and they go, shh. And they go tiptoeing in the woods. Everything in 2 miles just heard you pull in there.
It's already out of there. Yep.
So, if you want to park, midday, hike a mile down, and just go sit in the woods and listen.
Yeah. So that's something that I was taught to do is, when you get into an area, you've disrupted it, sit down at least for half an hour, complete silence, let the woods come back to itself. And you'll be amazed when some of the sort of the normal critters start walking around and that sort of thing. But people, I don't think, realize how loud they can be out there and how just lacking that awareness of how loud they are. It's pretty amazing. I mean, especially if you are hearing a group of people coming in, it's incredible. It really is like an elephant.
Yeah. And so they have better eyesight. They can hear you coming. They're faster than you. And then I found out they don't like you to have anything in your hands. They want your hands empty if you can see them.
Yeah.
They like your hands empty. And so that complicates things.
Of course.
So yeah, I hit a brick wall of observation. I can go empty-handed and work really hard for a whole year and maybe have a fleeting glimpse of one for 6 or 8 seconds. And you can do that. You can do that for 5 years, have 5 encounters, and you can tell people, yeah, I had 5 encounters, but then they'll tell you, then people say, well, where's your proof?
It's like a circle. You go in a circle, and if you try to add, preface it with all this sort of the caveats, right? Well, hey, let's compare this to the only other things that are like us that live in the woods, which are some of the great apes, right? And the amount of time that it takes to get glimpses of them once you're in the woods. I mean, from people like Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and others, there was that level of trust that needed to be built up there. You can tell that to people, but they still will then be, well, you know, they did get video proof, or they did get proof of these things.
Yeah.
And they have to realize they're not dealing with, you know, a gorilla or something along those lines.
Yeah.
How do you convey that?
Yeah, I understand. I don't think trust lives in them for us, because I was around a juvenile for several years as he grew. I tracked him as he grew. I encountered him as he grew. I was just feet from him in the broad daylight, so long as I didn't pay attention to him. If I pretended he wasn't there and I'm fishing, he would like to sit and watch me use a fishing rod. Okay.
Interesting.
But if I tried to reach in my pocket, anything, it was out. It was gone. And I can say that, but I can't plug my brain into a computer and show people that. So it's just me talking. So
it's like an abused cat or a dog. Over time they might warm up to you, but in this instance, it's almost like there may be the willingness to be 30, 40, 50 feet away plus, but there's never a willingness to really move past that point. Maybe that's just instinctual to them. Maybe that's ingrained in them. I don't know.
Well, they don't have to know you. They need your absence. That's what they need.
Right.
Okay. Only the information from the survival standpoint of them, other than food, shelter, a place to stay away, from us predators, and water, is information of how do we operate. We drive four-wheelers, we drive side-by-sides, we drive trucks, we drive these weird things where the legs go round and around and around, carrying us through woods. And we get out on the trail, we go down a trail, we sit down, we scratch our butt, drink some water, check our phone.
We shoot some boomsticks, do all these very loud and obnoxious sort of things.
Yeah, and they're very aware of what behavior exists in us in their area. And they share the area. Okay, they understand that a certain time of year, people are going to come run in the woods, they're going to kill some fuzzy little animals and leave. A certain part of the year, people are going to be in there with these long, skinny things, pulling something like this out of the water. They understand the ebbs and flows of what we do out there. And
we're very predictable.
Yeah. And they understand. Yeah. And they understand we're going to leave. We're going to leave. And then they can come in and do what they need to do and then go back to where they need to be. And that is the balance that is there and has been there for a long time.
I mean, I'm nodding because having been involved in the subject, it just makes sense. I mean, you get to a point where these things, you hear things, and obviously I don't take everything I hear at complete face value, but you get to a certain point where you just hear the same things over and over and over again. That really shows displays the behaviors that a species would show. And things that just make sense. I mean, once you kind of understand some basics, it's just things that it's like connecting the dots. And I know it sounds probably ridiculous to people that are on the outside or maybe just getting into the Bigfoot topic, probably preposterous, but that's just the nature of the beast, so to speak. I don't know.
The patterns of the evidence speak for itself to me, but only because I've been out there doing it. There's no way me right now could have went back to 2002 and told me then that Bigfoot was real. I'd have laughed at him, or I might have beat his ass. There's no way. But being out there and seeing the pattern of evidence because I didn't just stay in this one area for 16 years. I took what I learned from this group and I went and found other areas and other groups. And I know where about 9 different groups are now within all the states around me.
Right.
Okay. Just using the criteria that this one group, tracking them and understanding what they call a home site, what they call, where they hunt at, what they're using the land for, how they're traversing, and going and taking that and going to other areas and going into those areas that match it topographically and finding the same things. Okay, I'm finding this trail. I found this corridor, I find their tracks on the corridor. I find the breaks that where their trail crosses ours, there's breaks. Okay. Anywhere their trail crosses ours, I'm finding, and it may just be a subtle break, but it's a break, you know. And tracking is so much more than just tracks.
Of course. People think it's just you got to find that perfect print, and that's how you're on the way. There's a lot that goes into tracking, and you can learn the basics, but I mean, the more you spend time out there, the more you'll learn about different types of animals and the way that they interact with different types of substrate and the environment around them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what have you noticed with this, sort of target species in there? Because people talk about, finding the gold standards of tracks, right? Those really clear prints, which is, as I'm sure you know, usually almost never the case. Do you think they actively avoid that sort of stuff? What do you think about, as somebody who's a tracker, what is your take on that? I'm really curious.
If they're not expecting anybody in the area at that particular time, they don't worry about hiding the tracks. If it's a well-used area by humans, they will hide the tracks. I've tracked that female. I tracked her stepping in ATV trails of a hunter that morning. Okay, so she's there. The hunter comes through, leaving out. They're about half a mile in. I'm tracking her, and then she steps into his tire tracks as she's walking. The bad thing is that she's going towards the road and where my truck is. So she's between me and my truck somewhere. And that's unnerving. It gets unnerving out there,
Well, just knowing there's a presence. I mean, that you're not the only sort of sentient being. I mean, you look at deer or other critters in the woods, and they do a lot of things instinctually. But from what I've heard from encounters with multiple people, there's like they see almost a thought process going on behind, the eyes of this creature.
Well, yeah. I tracked down. There's a trailhead, and she drops down a hill, and she's going across a creek, and up in elevation about another 260 yards back is their home site. So as she stepped down the creek, she's grabbing a sapling, and you can see where her fingers are twisting the bark off, stepping down into the creek. You can see her foot and her heel impression going down in the water, where she's caving the side of the creek in as she's stepping in there, stepping across, and then using a knee. You see the knee in the dirt on the other side of the embankment as she gets up out of the embankment. And you see, and I'm tracking these 7-inch tracks of the juvenile, and you see him step up, and then he don't spine where he crawls out. That means she grabbed him and pulled him out. So, and there's things that you can find tracking that will lend to their behavior.
Yeah.
That's where I really get to the details of the mechanics of tracking, is when I'm trying to discern the behavior of them.
And I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, if you're trying to track a human being, you're, especially someone that knows that they're being followed, covering up footprints, whatever, you're going to look for other things. And that's what you mentioned, I think, earlier, a good point about tracking is not just about footprints. The way that the footprints are putting, or the way that there's interactions, you mentioned, with finding the twist or the knee or certain things, certain movements, certain motions, it's all absolutely a part of it. And, Kevin Hamilton has put a comment in that says, I'm not convinced you need to be an expert on tracking woods or anything else. There are literally thousands of stories of normal people with sightings and surprise encounters. I think luck is big. I agree. I think luck, you don't need to be an expert to have a Bigfoot encounter, but I think, as Patrick is saying, having a basis in tracking can actually allow you to perhaps be able to
consistently
or find some sort of secondary evidence. I mean, I don't know. Let's say there was a sighting 3 days ago reported, and you're able to get to that area. And if you maybe know a little bit about tracking, you might be able to come out with something that can substantiate this person's sighting, or if it was your own, or whatever the case may be.
Well, when they're moving through an area, say you have a sighting, if you can track them for about a mile and a half, 2 miles, you're going to come to one of their trails. You can follow that trail all the way to their next area. Okay, the next area may be a field they hunt in. If you fall to a field and there's deer tracks all through this field, then and that trail will stop. They don't just walk out into a field. They stop and they skirt around the field. You know, they'll stay 5 to 10 yards back in the field, and I've tracked this. Oh, I got something to tell you on that. But I tracked them skirting the field, and depending on which way the wind blew, was what side of the field they were hunting from. Okay, this is the same field that we actually had that nighttime encounter.
Oh, interesting.
But up and around about 3/4 mile, this is a huge piece of property, private property. There's an area where there is, up on a bluff, there's trees, and there's trees broke off and woven into those trees, and you can just see through like this. And there's a game trail that comes up over the hill out of a white oak acre and comes through this little clearing. It's a wash area. Well, inside this wash area, I found a fence row of brush that was broke off and stuck in the ground to divert the traffic of the game that they're after to skirt closer to that brush end area that they're hiding in. Okay, that's the level of intelligence that you're dealing with. That's something I would do as a primitive survivalist if I'm hunting with a spear. You know, if I'm hunting with a short weapon, I would fence it off to where they would come closer to me. And that's what they were doing in that area. You know, so, you know, and it comes down to your mindset. Okay, once I realized they're real, a lot of researchers out there, and this is a huge problem in research, not as a personal problem, but in the research itself. The huge problem is most people researching just to prove to themselves that it's real.
Yeah.
You know, and they cannot get past that. Once you get past that, then you can start looking in other chapters and other ways and using other tactics and further what you're doing until you hit a brick wall. And you know, that's observation. You can do everything. You can get hand grabs, you can get hand prints, you can get tracks. You know, you can find their corridors. You know where they're calling home at on a map, but you cannot get them on film because of that. They stay out away from you.
Right. And that's the tricky part. I mean, and I think that's something come up with. I mean, just like one of the questions here from Donald says, with all this matter of fact information, can we see proof of it? And I think that's the tough part of it.
Well, everything I said that I have, which is hand grabs, hand prints, tracks, are all on Patrick Vaugn Tracking on Facebook. You're more than welcome to go look at all of that.
Yeah, I'll have to link that in the description of the videos below. But we talked about it earlier. That's just that's the frustration there, right? I mean, you can bring in the caveats and all that sort of stuff, but it's absolutely tough to with little to show. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just personally kind of speaking now. I know I haven't seen all the sort of stuff that you have for some of the things that you found. I don't know. It's just, I think a lot of people get frustrated in that sense, and just that leads to, you know, very bad choices and bad places that people go with their research. And I don't know.
Well, I mean, I have my critics, and I do this for the general study as a whole. If I can't satisfy someone as I don't have a daytime video of 30 seconds long of a Bigfoot, I welcome them to go out and do that themselves.
Right.
You know, or show me how, because I'm still trying to figure out how to do that.
Right. And you're openly saying that. And I think that's part of it. And you know, as we're talking about all these sort of behaviors, and when I was mentioning earlier, it just sort of makes sense. If you're dealing with something that's this elusive, that even when is somewhat comfortable with a human presence that they may be aware of, the moment you change up your attitude is immediately going from the area, then, I mean, how would you immediately want to conclude, well, there needs to be a 30-second video of this thing in broad daylight, when every other thing that you've seen or observed so far says that is an extremely unlikely event to occur? Well,
the equation I've been working in my head puts out different scenarios, plausible scenarios of filming them. One of them, which I think is more plausible than anything else. They make these monopoles that will go on your vehicle, that will extend up. They're hydraulic, or some of them electrical. They'll extend up with optics on them, and they'll go up 30 feet. And if you have the right optics on them to zoom out, and if you're using thermal in an area where you believe they're at, and you can pick one out in thermal and then zoom in during the day. You can do this during the day and then zoom in with an HD camera and film it. Yeah. I believe that's more plausible than any aircraft or any tracker or any boots on the ground person. You use topography. You have a good idea where they're at. Take this vehicle in there and either set up a radio a half mile away where you're back watching it with these optics, or whatever scenario, or even just scanning for a couple of days in the area you believe they're at. You may pick up thermal signature and be able to zoom in on them. And you're not limited to a drone battery or rules and laws that govern that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's almost, I don't want to say being caught off guard, but that's almost sort of you're moving through an environment and you're seeing things that might be in the area. But I don't know. It's just still, it's frustrating because I understand people, as we were talking about earlier. I think we live in that need to see to believe sort of culture. I mean, you can have all these encounters and vivid detail. And as you mentioned, going in there empty-handed, I mean, go ahead.
Donald Fuller, I was in live chat with Iron Dogger on her channel in Alaska. You may be able to get her to send that to you, because she used my single knock theory and replicated my results of single knock 4,600 miles away from me, and actually got surrounded by them. So if you'd like to get a hold of her, I'm not sure if that is, some of her settings is where some of her videos will go private, because she just hadn't changed that, or she's kind of new to the YouTube thing. But that happened, and there was multiple witnesses in chat that watched that happen, because I got my butt handed to me. I got in a lot of trouble over that. I was tired and I fell asleep, and I had people calling my phone. What are you doing leaving her out there in the dark? I'm like, she's 4,600 miles away from me. I can't do anything. I've had 2 hours sleep in 3 days. I fell asleep.
Yeah. No, I mean, the tree pop thing, I've heard that before. I've heard, tree pops where I live in New Hampshire. It gets really cold in the winters as well. And we have certain areas in the mountains where it can be close to Arctic temperatures. I mean, places, some of these mountains in the White Mountains, they test out Arctic gear because it's more affordable to come up here than it is to go to, Alaska or wherever. But there's just certain things that, and if you've experienced them, especially if it's more than one at a time. And I think that goes back to a question we had from Tristan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking some questions here. Tristan asked, what do you guys think the knocks mean? And I know you talked a little bit about that and sort of having that communication, but if you had another maybe idea, I've heard the theory of the 1 knock versus the 2 knock versus the 3. There's a whole sort of gamut of thoughts that people have on that.
Single knock was an experiment that proved out, but single knock, I can say hey multiple ways. I can say hey, and your perception of it means I'm trying to get your attention, but my perception of it is I'm fixing to hand your ass to you. I'm mad. So hey can be said multiple different ways. So single knock actually it's in the context it's used, the volume it's used, and the distance it's used in. Okay. 2 knock was done as an invitation to me. Okay, I had one invite. Actually, I had more than one occasion, 2 occasions, and one of them, the producer of Bigfoot Explorer with an X, was there. Got 2 sets of 2 knocks. It was an invitation from the juvenile that I'd been investigating. But it's an invitation. The 3 knock, I've witnessed twice, actually 3 times. and it always had to do with danger, warning, get out of the area. So I've used a 3-knock, and I had one tear off, almost take down 2 pine saplings getting out of the area. So 1 is, hey, I'm here. 2 is an invitation, and 3 is a danger warning, get out of the area. That's as close as I can boil it down to, and have it work. It's worked out there. So,
have you heard more than 3? Any kind of drumming sort of stuff or anything like that?
Yeah, I have on camera, on video in my area. I had a guy come up and was videoing me tracking in my area, and we got a warning. We got a 3-knock, a 6-knock, and a 3-knock. Now, at the time, we got confused because I didn't know. If I knew it had been a 3-knock, I'd have left the area immediately. But it sounded like a 2-knock and a 6-knock. And I wasn't, but replaying the audio, it was a 3-knock, 6-knock, 3-knock. And it's actually in the spectrum, when you're going through the spectrum of that, there's a pow, 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 and then a 6-knock, and then a 3-knock. But because the guy who's going through audio can't hear, he missed that little piece.
It can be easy to miss things in audio. Analyzing audio is very, very difficult.
But I have no idea what those mean. I don't know what a 6-knock means. I'm not brave or stupid enough to try to use something as a threatening way towards something that's 2 feet taller than me and outweighs me by 400 or 500 pounds.
Yeah. Now, also on the topic of knocks, Barry Browning asked, does Patrick think they make the wood knock sound in more than one way?
I suspect they do. That it'd be my speculation. I believe they're using a hard instrument on a tree most of the time, but I think they could be using bone as well.
Do you make anything about the theory about hand claps or anything like that? I know you said that one knock sounded almost hand-like on a tree. Do you think about hand clapping or chest thumping or anything like that?
I heard we got chest thumping on a video. We're all in a tent, and I hear this.
Yeah, interesting.
And I said that was something, and I couldn't figure out what it was at the time. And they're like, was it wood? Was it what? And I said, no, it wasn't wood. It just sounded like. And it wasn't until I was watching a primate show and this great ape did that.
Interesting.
And I'm like, wow, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So, and we got yelled at that night. It's not like that happened. That's the only thing that happened. We got yelled at and scoffed at and spooked. And this thing started yelling and screaming at us, just 40 yards off because, we were soliciting this. We were being aggressive. We're yelling, we were knocking, we were yelling, we were screaming. The female investigator with us was screaming, and then this thing opens up with this and just starts screaming at us. And everybody's eyes got that big. And you could hear its feet scuffing in the leaves as it was doing that. And it's like, yeah.
Well, I think that's just one of the most interesting parallels, and I don't know if that point goes over people's heads at times. I don't think the general public obviously is really aware of some of the nuances. Just that comparison with ape behavior. I mean, because that's all we really have to base off of. Anything Australopithecus, Paranthropus, Gigantopithecus, the only thing we have to compare to are modern primates and great apes. And you have that sort of parallel between not only things like the smell that's reported and the fact that gorillas control scent glands when angry or agitated, that thump, the chest thumping, the wood knocking is in chimps being able to do that as a communicative technique. I just think that's something that we need people that maybe have primatology backgrounds to listen to some of these Bigfoot sounds, listen to some of these recordings. Because I've heard a recording multiple times, probably very similar to this sort of thumping that you're reporting, and you play a gorilla thumping sound, it's virtually the same. It's very, very weird. Well, now, go ahead.
There are no experts in Bigfoot. Okay, there just aren't. If you wanted to put me as an expert in anything, it'd be tracking,
Yeah.
But it's been a learning curve and hundreds of experiments to get the data points I have. So I'm really just, I go out there ignorant of what I'm going to receive for what I'm going to do. And then I get a certain amount of success and then the rest failure. Oh, I wanted to talk about the cam. I went into an area last summer in May, and I found a hill that was pushed up by a dozer. I got my camp shovel out. I dug a hole back into it. I set a camera with IR activated in the hole. I scent killed everything, put it in the hole, and then I poured coyote urine around the hole and on a tree in front of the hole. That's the closest I've had one step up to a camera and not know it. I literally, the camera went off, but the only thing I caught was a tip of a head right here. That's all I got. I got the tip of a head. And that is on Patrick Vaugn tracking albums. There's tracking albums, and there's other signs. Other signs are something I don't like to draw a conclusion. All I can say is the reality that existed and how I perceived it. I had 14-inch tracks in front of this hole, and it set the camera off, and I got that of it. So, that's how you should take it. But burying the camera in the ground seemed to hide whatever their senses are that pick them out.
Interesting.
And if you wanted to use that.
Yeah, I'm very curious to experiment with that. Now, kind of relating to what we were talking about with comparing to primates, Jay asked, do you think that they are a type of human?
No, I don't think they're human at all. I think they are a hominid branch that has been undiscovered. Okay, science admits and says we were never alone on this earth. Not for all this time, not through this twisted branch and vine of hominid evolution were we ever alone. But now they're saying we're alone. Now, are they correct in saying we're alone, or did they miss a branch somewhere? What is the most probable answer to that? All these sightings for the last 1,800 years, 1,700 years, recorded sightings through the First Nations, through the primitive nations that lived here, and then a whole other society takes over this continent, and we start seeing them too.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you explain all of that? And science saying that we were never alone ever, except now.
Right. And I mean, I personally think that necessarily the fossil record is very tricky. I mean, as I mentioned earlier with the Gigantopithecus, the largest known ape in history, and we have so little to show that it actually existed. You could probably convince somebody that it's not real based on the evidence that's available, right? And you think things like gorillas and chimps, they virtually don't exist in the fossil record because they happen to live in those environments that are just not conducive for fossilization. So, I mean, there's so much possibility, wiggle room there. And I think, I'll never forget when I was in school, in high school back in the day, hearing a professor tell me that, what he learned as a kid about human evolution or our origins, that sort of thing is completely different from what we're being taught now. And now 10 years later, it's going to be completely different from what they learned, what I would have learned. It's always changing.
Absolutely. And that generation, and also mine, what was beat in their head is it's not real unless science says it's real. But I grew up in two different worlds. I grew up learning how to survive in the real world, which is this planet, the natural world, and also man's subsidized system that is built on this world.
Yeah.
So
those
I'm
are
okay
completely separate.
with
those are totally separate.
Yeah. So my mindset is a little different than then it's not real unless science says it's real.
Yeah.
But I understand the frame of mind, because my frame of mind in 2002, I don't have to believe a single thing you say, no matter what. If you had prints, if you had a picture of one 4K at 20 yards and you showed it to me, I'd still call you a liar, because I don't have to accept it. I don't need it in my world. I can't handle it in my world. I'm stressed out enough with everything else that's on my plate. I don't want this in me. I don't want to acknowledge this. And so I had to look at that myself, in myself. That's not accusing anybody of anything. That's me. That was my mindset. And now I went from that to, okay, guys, these things are real. Be careful out there. You know. And and if someone with my skill sets tells you something's out there, something's out there.
Right. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to be in the woods. I mean, you probably can put your skills up to some biologists and know more about the woods than they do. And it doesn't mean they're not an expert in what they're studying. I mean, they just may not. Yeah. They are good in that humans-made system. That's where they exceed. And I think it's if you can get the cooperation between the two, I mean, I think that's probably more ideal. Yeah. But Chuck Gonzalez says these creatures come from an ugly branch. Don't tell them that to their face.
Yeah. Well, this one subject is bigger than one person, one group, one team. It's bigger than one discipline or even discipline of science. It's bigger than that. Okay, sure. We're not going to do this alone. You know, that's why I'm here as an asset. I'm not competing for anything, and I'm not here for any limelight. I actually don't like the attention.
Sure.
This is a risk. This is a risk to me. I risk a lot, you know, and there's been zero reward. I haven't made any money off this. I haven't tried to make money off this, and all I do is get ridiculed by people in the Bigfoot community that's supposed to think they're real, but then I get ridiculed. So there's no reward for it. You know, I'm just an asset saying these are the things I'm finding, and I have a solid basis, and I can show you pictures of why I'm basing my decisions on.
Right. No, and I think we need more people like that are, and as you mentioned, I mean, the difficulties of even within so-called Bigfoot community or Bigfoot groups, everyone's always just ripping each other, and everything's fake, everything's a hoax, and of course, it is important to be skeptical and take everything with a grain of salt. But you get to a point where, I mean, you have to start actually evaluating things a little more substantively. Now, here's a question from Pat Squatch Talk, who says, "How do they stay dry? Being wet equals death." Interesting question.
Well, how do deer stay dry? How do elk survive winter? How do horses survive winter? You know, I still don't know if they grow a winter coat or they don't want to grow a winter coat. I couldn't answer that question, but obviously they're there, and they get wet and they don't die.
I think it's and again, comparing it to other apes, a lot of other apes need to live in areas that have a lot more moisture than even deciduous forests in North America. Obviously, in the areas like Sumatra that the orangutan live in, or the jungles in the Congo or the Virunga where the chimps and gorillas live, those are rainforests. I mean, and where do a majority of sightings of Bigfoot in the U.S. come from? The temperate rainforest that we have. Mm-hmm. So I think that's rain, I think, just creates a conducive environment that these primates seem to live in. I don't know.
I've never had my research slow down in the winter, in the cold winter months. I've never had them slow down in research. What slowed them down was the 104 degree, 90% humidity days. That's what slowed down.
That slows everyone down.
Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. here in August, that's the window they have to operate in. That is cooled down to 88 to 90 degrees. You know, and that's cool compared to 104 to 106 with the humidity that it was there, during the daytime. So during the summer, I actually have to shift my clock. Wintertime I can track in the daytime and research in the evenings and night, and shut it off when I'm tired. But if I'm researching in the summer, I got to start at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Which also brings me to another important part of research. They like a dark night. Okay, I schedule everything that I do on my research to a moon that rises at 5 or 6 a.m. and goes down at 4, 5, 6 p.m. And so the night is dark. And that's when I get the most activity. I've never had anything on a full moon. That's why I said, man, they got a knock on a full moon. That's crazy,
I think it was the environment. It's just so extremely difficult to work in an environment like that. We as humans are more disadvantaged than in any other forest because it's all water. I mean, it's crazy, but yeah, no, it's one of those things. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what to really make of it.
I was impressed. I said, wow, which I developed the rules. You have to develop the rules when you're in the field. Okay. Because you can go out there and you get a knock. Okay. Now what? After you do that a couple hundred times, now what?
Everything's getting out of the way.
So I developed a rule that if I hear it out there, I'm going to zigzag to it. I'm not going to walk directly to it, but I'm going to shoot to this side for 30 yards and go this way 30 yards and I'm going to walk and I'm going to keep it in a V where I'm walking to that area to either find where it hit the tree at when it knocked and its tracks that are there by the tree, or possibly walk right up on it if I have a camera guy behind me and actually get it on film. So I developed that rule towards the end of research with a camera guy. I didn't get I did that and accidentally walked up on one tracking and shined it in the eye at 6 feet, but I didn't have a camera there. I wish I had.
Yeah. There was a little bit of a conversation earlier when you mentioned, the summer months, and I know how brutal it is down south. I'm a northern guy, so when I go down south, it's when there's almost none of that crazy weather. I can't handle it. But there was a debate about whether something like that could even survive in a sort of environment where you have that 100% humidity with 100-degree day. But you have other woodland creatures that are furry, like black bears and deer and the panther in the Florida case that live in this environment, which even in our Skunk film, I said there's a lot more pleasurable places you could go investigate in a lot of these areas down south. So as you mentioned, I mean, there's that, it just makes sense that you would operate in an area where you have the most opportunity to get out there without being, sweating to death, essentially.
Well, you also bring a point of what I think helps in research. Survival is different in different regions. The Pacific Northwest with short growing seasons, you have to migrate and move around. It's going to be hard to keep up with something like that. In the South with longer growing seasons and plenty of game, they have to migrate. I would have to migrate less to feed myself. And also we don't have the vast forest down here. You might have 30 to 50,000 acre tract of land, and then a couple hundred miles away there'll be another 30 or 40,000 acre tract of land.
Yeah.
And so inside that tract of land, it's easier to go in tracking 50,000 acres than it is, 50,000 miles up in northern Canada and all that. So, it condenses them. That helps tracking. It's not that I'm something fantastic. I'm not. I'm just a guy. But down here, they are condensed in different areas, and they're there. If you just know, what cues me in is I'm going along and I see a hole in the woods like this. I'll see a hole in the woods and I'll stop and I'll get out and I'll track that for a mile. And you may find nothing, or you may find 17-inch tracks where it's crossing the road and using that trail to go somewhere.
Now this is a question that's, I think, relating to your first encounter. What about her facial appearance compared to human?
She had my nose. That creeped me out. That absolutely bothered me is that she had this nose. Okay, her jawline was wider, her jaw was heavier, and her head, it wasn't a sharp conical anything. But it did rise up to a point. And she had hair, just massive red hair, and then wispy red hair starting here and going down on her cheeks, with wispy red hair on her nose, red hair on her here, and it starts getting thicker. And when it gets here, it starts getting thicker, and it's about that long on her face. But she had a grain to her hair. There wasn't a shagginess to her. It was just like if you look at a horse or a dog, your dog has a grain to its hair. You have a grain to your hair, how your hair grows. There's nothing shaggy to her. She was a terrifying and handsome animal.
Interesting. I don't know if we necessarily talked about this earlier, but Kevin asks, why does Patrick think he's been able to have so many successful encounters when other ardent researchers never get lucky enough to even have one in their whole life?
Training, skill sets, and discipline. That's what it comes down to. Okay, right. You have to have the mindset of a hunter, but you're not hunting animals, you're hunting a being. Okay, you have to understand what's being applied against you. You have to understand how it's using and why it's using the area it's using. You have to have the hunting skill sets of stealth and knowing how to use scent kill, and knowing how to use camouflage, knowing how to move through the woods without making a bunch of noise. You have to have the discipline. And the more you hunt something, the more discipline you bring upon yourself as you fail. Okay, I learned much more out of failure than I did anything. And there's failure attached to every single encounter or experience or experiment that I've done with these things. And so failure will teach you discipline, and it'll put you in a mindset of when you get out there, you change into that mindset and that discipline to do the job.
Yeah, interesting. Now, Ryan here asks, any thoughts on Hex Suits?
I have no dealings with Hex Suits. I mean, they may work. I don't know.
Right. No, definitely an interesting one. I mean, people talk about, the camouflaging, all that sort of stuff, and different techniques. What works, what doesn't. I mean, maybe some things work in certain areas. I mean, you brought up that sort of point earlier about if there's an area that's used by humans a lot, and I think that kind of has to do with adaptive behavior. I mean, if you're going to an area that there's virtually almost never human beings in, some super remote area of northern Canada, maybe you'll have better luck at having prints or using other techniques that have never really been tried. But if you get certain places, state parks, national forests, where you've got a lot of people going in and banging on trees and doing squatching, there's no reason to believe that an animal wouldn't be able to have some sort of adaptive behavior. I mean, we have examples of other wildlife within a generation, even just being able to adapt their behavior based on humans. It's not absolutely implausible idea, at least the way I see it.
Yeah, they learn. Okay, they learn. They learn it down here. They learn when people are hunting, when people are fishing, when people are forward riding. They learn not just the seasons, but what is expected of people to do out there. It's going in and doing things that people don't do in areas that people don't do it in that has gotten me a lot of results. I'm going to have to take a break for a second.
Yeah, no worries. Right on. Yeah. So super interesting, guys. I really always appreciate the questions and comments on that stuff. I'm trying to get to them all. There's a lot. Brian says, I got to talk to Vaughn about my knock encounter from this past May. Yeah, that was an interesting one. I thought of that when I was asking him about the more than 3 knocks, Brian, because that's obviously something we have discussed in the past, which I found interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that if you've experienced some really weird knocks or really weird things that aren't tree pops or other animals, it always just begs the question, is something right in the area? What is actually going on? It gets frustrating. I mean, I've heard lots of knocks, and not every time it was a Bigfoot, of course. I can't say any of them were definitively a Bigfoot, but when you kind of start exhausting the other possibilities of what it might be, it does leave a sense of frustration. And I think what Patrick's talking about with discipline is absolutely crucial. And in that kind of question about other researchers that have not had encounters, I think if you look at the way Bigfoot research was first kind of started with some of those earlier folks, a lot of it was sighting chasing. They were essentially going to areas with a history of reports and just kind of, or chasing individual sightings, which I don't think is invalid. I mean, if there's an area of the habitat that supports a creature that, or is able to, and it's seen once, I mean, there's probably a possibility they might be able to be in the same area again if the resources are there, and if there are other biological metrics, in terms of other species that are able, large species in particular. That's something that I always say, that I look at areas that support moose. Obviously, not everywhere in North America has that case, but in areas that can support a 1,200 pound plus animal and multiple of them, that to me tells me that's a relatively healthy environment in terms of just being able to provide sustenance for very large creatures. And I think the problem is, as human beings, we have so much interference with environments. So we've created environments that are completely different than what they would have been if it was unmolested by human encroachment or logging, and then regrowth, new growth forest, second, third generation growth forest. So you got to take that into account as well. I was just kind of talking about biological sort of possibilities in certain areas that support other wildlife. But definitely interesting. Let's see. I'm just having trouble. If you guys just make sure you guys do all caps for questions, please. That really helps. I see Mothman 46 in the chat as well. Did Alex have any luck this weekend? Oh, no, we just kind of hung out. We were out there in the woods in Minerva, Ohio. We did some stuff at this property that has a history of weird things going on. We tracked some deer. We saw some kind of a possible weird light that we thought was somebody breaking into a car on a hill away. So we ended up going down there real quick, but nothing I would say Bigfoot related, of course, but just a good time to be out in a cool part of Ohio for sure. Yeah. So in kind of, as we start to wrap up here, Patrick, I know, you're out there a lot. I mean, if you had to guess how often, disregarding research, I mean, how much time do you spend on average out in the woods? I can imagine it's quite a bit with some of your guys that you do the survivalist skills with. What's the kind of, what do those trips sort of look like?
The survival trips only?
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know if you're the kind of guy that when you're on these trips, do you do a little bit of Bigfoot stuff on the side, or do you completely separate it when you're out with your crew and that sort of thing?
I keep an eye out for safety factor.
Sure.
Only. I'm not allowed to speak about it, and if I do find tracks, I'm required to destroy the tracks on that property. We have a camp every quarter, so 4 times a year. So we'll spend 20, 25, 30 days out of the year doing primitive survival.
That's amazing.
And I added up all the hours that I spent researching these things, and I can't remember what it was. It was over 20,000 hours that I spent researching just during that 16-year time. That 16-year time, cuts off. And then that's when I stepped in the Bigfoot world in the community and took a team out and had a team behind me tracking, showing them tracks, getting them knocked at, getting them yelled at, getting them screamed at, getting them growled at, and tracking different areas in different parts of states and different states, including the sighting, the nighttime sighting. So, everything was on camera, on film, or in a picture. It's not like I'm sitting here just with some delusion.
Yeah.
And
talking, stories, right?
Yeah. And people have been out with me. I don't believe in bragging. I don't think a man should brag. I think if a man's worth bragging, a person will brag. If someone will talk about him in a good way.
Right.
And I've had people talk about me in a good way and say that guy knows what he's doing. I've been out with him.
Well, you proved yourself out in the woods. I mean, it's one thing to make big claims and then not be able to substantiate that. So I think that's interesting. I'm just curious because as a fan of backpacking and my mild experience compared to your time, survivalism out in the woods, that's where my interest in that primarily comes from. And I know you mentioned you've been to the Rockies. I mean, have you done stuff in what other parts of the country? Have you done these sort of these survivalist outings?
Montana, Colorado,
Oh,
Kansas,
beautiful.
Missouri, Oklahoma. The picture that you used for your thumbnail is in the Comanche Mountains in Oklahoma.
Oh, cool.
Texas, Louisiana, and primarily my big footing is Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi. A little in Oklahoma.
Yeah, there was a question about that, so hopefully that answers that. Now, when you guys are out there, obviously you are very much playing the part. You're embracing that role of mountain men or trappers from, I'd say 100, 200 years ago at least, which I think is cool. Now, do you guys have a cutoff for bringing any kind of tech or anything? Is it all not even little film cameras or anything like that, or how does that work?
Everything has to be in the style.
Oh, cool.
And you have to research and prove it existed pre-1840.
That is pretty neat.
Now you are allowed, because we want people to come out. We make allowances. You have one bag you can carry with you if you need your medicines, if you have problems with you. We've had guys with CPAP masks that come in that will sleep out away from camp so that no one hears it. It's out of sight, out of mind, but they need it, so we allow it.
Of course, yeah.
And also a lot of time what we'll do, we'll buy 5 or 6 cameras and we'll write our name on them and hand them out to everybody. And so as it goes on, people say, can I take a picture? You'll ask permission.
Yeah.
Respect is a huge thing out there. Respect and honesty are the two things that will get you kicked out. Okay. They could tie you to a tree in the wintertime and leave you there. Okay. It's serious. So, can I take a picture? And you might have your camera and 2 other cameras, someone else handing to you. So you're just taking pictures. And at the end of the trip, everybody gets their cameras back and they get different perspectives of what this person saw and what this person valued as a photograph opportunity. And you get some really cool shots like that.
And that is cool. I mean, you have a certain amount as well that you can get. I mean, I know the few times that I've done a couple of these trips, we did a big one, 3 weeks in the Smoky Mountains, and we had to make our own baskets for packs, and then had to make our capotes, and we had to make all the food. We're making acorn flour and pemmican and all that sort of stuff. It was just such a great experience. We did smaller trips when I was doing this naturalism stuff, but that was the biggest one I did. And all we were really allowed to bring was obviously, like you said, also if we had some emergency kind of medical stuff. But our instructor, he had a sat phone just in case, for forbidden. One person brought a camera. We were allowed one camera, and it was one of those little kind of CVS ones that you get just with, I don't know, 15, 20 images, and then you get it developed afterwards. So we had to wait. There was no instant gratification. You had to wait to find out what those photos looked like. So you really had to just live it in the moment. I think that's something, I experience with a lot of the filming we do is I absolutely love being in these areas, but a lot of times, we're trying to get shots. We're trying to capture what an area is on film that you sort of, when you put the camera down, it's nice to just be able to soak in that environment. And this is how people would have experienced it long ago. So when you're in that role, I think it's cool. More power to you. I really want to get more back into the survivalism and the naturalism, I guess. And awesome stuff that you're doing for sure.
Thank you. And there's Iron Dogger.
Yeah, I saw Iron Dogger popped in and said, "Good to see Patrick sharing his experiences." Absolutely. Now,
can she put in chat whether her live streams that have been in the field are public or private, so people could watch what happened out there?
Sure, I can see if she will. She'll post that. And I could post that in the comments below. You cool with taking one more question?
Sure.
All right, we got this one from Yar Yekrib. Says, would Pat ever consider writing a book about his experiences and what he learned?
I don't know. There's a lot of responsibility. I feel the weight of responsibility for these beings' lives. And I've considered writing a memoir of this is what I did A to Z. I actually put my entire 16-year study on video on YouTube, being interviewed about it. And it's all out there in Patrick Vaugn Chronicles 1 through 4 or 5, whatever it was. But everything that was applicable and studied is there. And I don't know if I want to write a book about it. And people ask me, well, do you have a map of everything? Yes, I do. On X Maps, I built a map of every sighting and everything and every corridor and what they're doing. I'm not going to share it. I don't want people going after these things, because some people think, oh, they're worth $1 million. Let's go kill one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not doing that.
Now that's something I've heard from other researchers as well, who have come forward with certain pieces of evidence or alleged evidence and have been ridiculed for it, and then they kind of have stuff that I don't want to say they're sitting on, but they don't have exactly publicly, that, if there was to be some sort of discovery moment, they could hand over some files to somebody and say, here you go, this is what I learned, which I think is interesting. That's not the first time I've heard that. Some people might say, oh, that it's keeping information secret. But I mean, if you, as you mentioned, having the detriment of publicly talking about this can be something that you lose credibility for in certain circles.
Well, I've taken trusted people out there, like that team that I started researching with. I tracked for them for 11 months. In 11 months, I went from getting them screamed at, yelled at, knocked out to a nighttime sighting on film. 11 months. That's all it took. He went in my area and I showed him everything, but he's not going to tell anybody. My tracking partner has been in my area, and you're not going to torture him and make him say anything about it. Right. Just because of the responsibility of that being there, and there's 8 billion humans on this planet, and probably half of them would want to go in and try to kill them. So I think they need to be recognized, and people need to be respectful of them. I don't necessarily think they need our protection. I mean, we can't even put a hand on one.
Yeah, right.
But when it comes down to it, people have to be aware that these things are real. Whether you perceive them or not, whether you believe me or not, or you can tell me I'm full of it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying to you is going to be in the back of your mind when you're out there. And if you start running into something that's weird with tracks and brakes, and you start getting yelled at, you're not going to keep going forward ignoring it. It may ring a flag in the back of your head where you can back out and get out safely without hurting yourself or anyone else. And that is why I do this.
That's a good point. I mean, people make stupid decisions when they're scared or uncomfortable, and that you probably have a greater chance of twisting an ankle and breaking something than being mauled by a Bigfoot, but it's a moment of panic, right? I mean, that's talk to some search and rescue guys and see, what people, if they had at least known about certain types of information, could have saved their life if they had not reacted a certain way. So I absolutely hear you. Now, I do just want to say, Iron Dogger did say, can't find the comment, said that the videos are public. So for folks about that, if you can send me the link to that, I'd be happy to put that in the description as well, or I can try to look it up. But well, I appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a really interesting discussion. Definitely we'll have to keep in touch, and I'd love to hear more about some of the stuff you have going on, because I'm a fan of the survivalism stuff as well. So I'd really definitely would want to get more into that as well. And
I have thought about making a survival channel. I've really been, I've came that close to
yeah,
taking a camera out there and filming survival, filming how to spearfish and how to make shelters, how to make fire,
sure.
and how to do. That is my passion.
Right.
Bigfoot ruined my passion, so now I'm studying them for a safety factor and putting awareness out.
Which I think is really interesting.
I appreciate the platform you provided and provide for people to do that. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, of course. I mean, it's my pleasure. I'm interested in the topic, and I like to talk to as many people from different viewpoints and perspectives. People that grew up woodsmen, people that were not woodsmen at all, that just happened to have an encounter, or whatever the case may be. Because I think that just the communication is key, and the more you can learn along the way, nothing wrong with that. So, I do got to ask you though: are you more of a fan of hand drill or bow drill?
Flint and steel.
Flint and steel. Okay, well that's a little bit less effort there.
Yeah, flint and steel is much nicer. You're not, no matter what the humidity is.
Right.
If I had to choose a drill, it's a bow drill. But the
Yeah.
humidity is a great determiner. If the humidity is above about 70%, you're not getting fire.
Sure.
I've built a fire in the pouring rain with flint and steel. So
it's a much bigger level of a spark, right? It's more temperature coming out instantly as opposed to having to care for a coal and really get it to where it needs to be.
well, you turn into a coal, because you're using char cloth, which is charred cotton, and you put it on your flint, and your flint is sharper than the hardened steel striker you're using. And as the flint cuts that hardened steel, that hardened steel turns red hot, and it's a spark that gets on your cloth. That is, it's nature to hold a little spark, and then you can take and wrap it in straw and blow on it gently, and it'll glow into a coal and then burst into flames, and then you can build your fire with that. But that's my preferred method. I've never gone cold or hungry using flint and steel.
There you go. That's not bad. Yeah, hand drill I feel is more of a team effort. I don't know. Do you do it solo usually, or is it just kind of with the team if you need be?
I use a solo hand drill, bow drill. The cordage has to come loop around your drill and come up to you.
Yep.
As you're sawing it. And if you have a nice hand block, and you can make a hand block and drive a brass tack down in the hole and put some lard in there, which is for lubrication, it's much easier to hold. And if you kneel down and put your elbow on your leg as in a kneeling position, and you're sawing it, you'll go till it smokes, and then you'll go about 60 seconds longer. And then when it's done, and your notch that you cut into it and the bark that's under it has caught your coal. And that works great at a lower humidity.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So for folks that don't know what a bow drill is, you've learned something. Go look it up. Maybe even try it yourselves. There is no better satisfaction than after weeks of trying, getting your first coal and getting a fire out of a bow drill. I mean, it's I know you can just grab a lighter or a match and easily light it, but I'm telling you, it's worth it. It's just a cool feeling. So absolutely love the survivalism aspect. Well, again, thank you so much, Patrick, for coming on, man.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys, everyone in the chat and the comments. As always, you guys are great. Really appreciate you guys tuning in and asking great questions. Hopefully I was able to get to all the questions. There's a lot. So for future, just please try to get them in all caps. I saw there were a bunch of questions in all caps, but it just makes it easier because there's a lot of stuff going on. And I'm glad people are having conversations in the chat and everything as well. But yeah, again, just would be awesome to be able to get to everyone's question. Obviously it's sometimes it's hard, but we'll try our best. And yeah, thanks everyone in the chat. Iron Darger says, yeah, Patrick should have a survival channel. It's cool. I mean, it's a popular topic. There's a lot of folks doing it with just primitive skills. I think it's awesome to have. We've lost so much of our primitive skills that our ancestors they sort of had it. They were taught from when they were little. Now, as Patrick was kind of saying, we have a society where you can just go and buy food in the grocery store, although that's not a granted. You don't take that for granted. There may be a time where that may not be a skill, or that may not be something that is available. You can just go buy a chicken at the store. I think the past few years have taught us all that we should probably have some level of preparedness or skills outside of the supply chains. Let's put it that way. Matt says I use fire sticks. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, guys, thanks again, everyone. Kaiju Ninja says Sasquatch survives on primitive skills. Maybe we need to do the same when searching for them. Yeah, I mean, for people that are proponents of the Patterson-Gimlin film, right? Those guys are out there on horseback, really kind of roughing it, much more so than most people are out in the woods now. So maybe that's something we need to kind of go back to. Kevin says, I can't bring myself typing in all caps. Seems rude. It does. It's like I don't know, angry Facebook all caps. I feel like I've seen that a bunch. But Yakrub says, thanks for this channel and all you do, Alex. Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm just having fun. I mean, I'm just glad that there's people tuning in and we get to share stories like Patrick's and other people as well. I mean, people are definitely sharing these stories from a place that it might not be easy to share a lot of times. And as Patrick was saying, and I've heard this time and time again, people saying, well, this is something that you are actually, it's a detriment to you coming out with this sort of stuff. Carrick, what's going on, man? He says, all wicked good talks about survival. If only we could grow ramen on bushes. I wish. That would be amazing. Our Nugger says, great show, Alex. Thanks. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. Late by arrival, Carrick. Howdy, Carrick. Tate opens his beer bottle with a bow drill. Probably. He will do that at some point. Cindy says, great show, Alex. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks to everybody else. Well, that's it. That's all I got for you guys tonight. So thanks again for tuning in. Next week, we'll be talking to Stacy Brown, who has an alleged piece of thermal footage. Obviously, he's quite an interesting guy. There's a lot that gets spoken of, people like Stacy and others that have reported evidence. So I think it'll just be interesting to speak to the man himself, and lots of other cool shows coming up. I'm just excited just to get to talk about it with you guys. So that's basically all I got for you guys. So thanks again, people, and we will see you guys later. Everyone have a good rest of your week. Try to stay sane in a crazy world. And yeah, everyone stay safe. Take it easy, guys.